I have the distinct honor today of pinch hitting for one of my personal heroes and a hero to this country, Senator Edward Kennedy. Ted is at home getting some much-needed and deserved rest. And we are so pleased to see many of his family here today, including his wonderful wife, Vicki. He called me up a few days ago, and I said that I'd be happy to be a stand-in, even though there was no way that I could fill his shoes. I did, however, get a chance to glance at the speech he planned on delivering today, and I'd like to start by passing along a message from Ted. To all those praying for my return to good health, I offer my heartfelt thanks. And to any who'd rather have a different result, I say, don't get your hopes up just yet. So we know that Teddy's legendary sense of humor is as strong as ever, and I have no doubt that his equally legendary fighting spirit will carry him through this latest challenge. He is our friend, he is our champion, and we hope and pray for his return to good health. Now, the topic of his speech today was common for a commencement. We heard some of the themes from President Roth, but one that nobody could discuss with more authority or more inspiration than Ted Kennedy, and that is the topic of service to one's country, a cause that is synonymous with his family's name and legacy. I was born the year that his brother John called a generation of Americans to ask their country what they could do. And I came of age at a time when they did. They were the Peace Corps volunteers who won a generation of goodwill towards America at a time when America's ideals were challenged. They were the teenagers and college students, not much older than you, who watched the civil rights movement unfold on their television sets, who saw the dogs and the fire hoses and the footage of marchers being beaten within an inch of their lives, who knew it was probably smarter and safer to stay home, but decided to get on those buses and get in their cars and get on those trains anyway and take those freedom rides down south, who still decided to march, and because they did, they changed the world. I bring this up today because you are about to enter a world that makes it easier to get caught up in the notion that there are actually two different stories at work in our lives. The first is the story of our everyday cares and concerns, the responsibilities we have to our jobs and our families, the bustle and the busyness of what happens in our lives. And the second is the story of what happens in the life of our country, of what happens in the wider world. It's the story you see when you catch a glimpse of the day's headlines or turn on the news at night. The story of big challenges like war and recession, hunger and climate change, injustice and inequality. It's a story that sometimes can seem separate and distant from our own, a destiny to be shaped by forces beyond our control. And yet the history of this nation tells us that it isn't so. It tells us that we are a people whose destiny has never been written for us, but by us, by generations of men and women, young and old, who have always believed that their story and the American story are not separate but shared. And for more than 2 centuries, they've served this country in ways that have forever enriched both. I say this to you as someone who couldn't be standing here if it were not for the service of others, and wouldn't be standing here today if it were not for the purpose that service gave my own life. You see, I spent much of my childhood adrift. My father left my mother and me when I was 2. When my mother remarried, I lived overseas for a time, but was mostly raised in Hawaii by her and my grandparents from Kansas. My teenage years were filled with more than the usual dose of teenage rebellion, and I'll admit that I always didn't always take myself or my studies very seriously. I realize that none of you can probably relate to this, overachievers that you are, but there were many times where I wasn't sure where I was going or what I was going to do with my life. But during my first 2 years of college, perhaps because the values my mother had taught me, values of hard work and honesty and empathy and compassion, had finally resurfaced after a long hibernation, or perhaps because of the example of wonderful teachers and lasting friends, I began to notice a world beyond myself. I became active in the movement to oppose the apartheid regime in South Africa. I began following the debates in this country about poverty and health care, so that by the time I graduated from college, I was possessed with this crazy idea that I was going to work at a grassroots level to bring about change. And I wrote letters to every organization in the country I could think of. And one day, a small group of churches on the south side of Chicago offered me a job to come work as a community organizer in neighborhoods that had been devastated by the closing of steel mills. Now, my mother and my grandparents, liberal-minded though they were, wanted me to go to law school. My friends were applying to jobs on Wall Street. Meanwhile, this organization offered me $12,000 a year plus $2,000 for an old beat-up car. And I said yes. I said yes. I didn't know a soul in Chicago, and I wasn't sure about what this community organizing business was all about. I'd always been inspired by the stories of the civil rights movement and by JFK's call to service, but when I got to the South Side, there were no marches, there were no soaring speeches. In the shadows of empty factories, there were just a lot of people who were struggling, and at first we didn't get very far. I still remember one of the very first meetings we put together. The community had been plagued by gang violence, and so we tried to mobilize a meeting with community leaders. And I had worked for weeks on this project, and we waited and waited for people to show up, and finally a group of older people walked into the hall and they sat down, and a little old lady raised her hand and asked, "Is this where the bingo game is?" It wasn't easy, but eventually we made progress. Day by day, block by block, we brought the community together and we registered new voters and we set up after-school programs and fought for new jobs and helped people live lives with some measure of dignity. I also began to realize that I wasn't just helping other people. Through service, I found a community that embraced me, citizenship that was meaningful, the direction that I'd been seeking. Through service, I discovered how my own improbable story fit into the larger story of America. Now, each of you will have the chance to make your own discovery in the years to come. And I say chance because, as President Roth indicated, you won't have to take it. There's no community service requirement in the outside world. No one's forcing you to care. You can take your diploma, walk off this stage, and chase only after the big house and the nice suits and the other things that our money culture says you should buy. You can choose to narrow your concerns and live life in a way that tries to keep your story separate from America's. But I hope you don't. Not because you have an obligation to those who are less fortunate, although I believe you do have that obligation. Not because you have a debt to all those who helped you get to where you are today, although I do believe you have that debt to pay. It's because you have an obligation to yourself. Because our individual salvation depends on collective salvation. Because thinking only about yourself, fulfilling your immediate wants and needs betrays a poverty of ambition. Because it's only when you hitch your wagon to something larger than yourself that you realize your true potential and discover the role that you'll play in writing the next great chapter in the American story. There are so many ways to serve, and so much that needs to be done at this defining moment in our history. You don't have to be a community organizer or do something crazy like run for president. Right here at this school, many of you have already volunteered at local high schools and elementary schools, contributed to the United Way, and even started a program that brings fresh produce to needy families in the area. 164 graduates of this school have joined the Peace Corps since 2001, and I confess a special pride that 2 of you are about to leave for my father's homeland of Kenya to bring alternative sources of energy to impoverished areas. I ask you to seek these opportunities when you leave here because the future of this country, your future, my children's future, depends on it. At a time when our security and our moral standing depends on winning the hearts and minds in the forgotten corners of the world, we need more of you to serve abroad. As president, I intend to grow the Foreign Service, double the Peace Corps over the next few years, and engage young people of other nations in similar programs so that we work side by side to take on the common challenges that confront all of humanity. At a time when our ice caps are melting and our oceans are rising, we need you to help lead a green revolution. We still have time to avoid the catastrophic consequences of climate change if we get serious about investing in renewable sources of energy, and if we get a generation of volunteers to work on renewable energy projects, and if we teach people about conservation and help clean up polluted areas, if we send talented engineers and scientists abroad to help developing countries promote clean energy in a way that's compatible with economic growth. At a time when a child in Boston must compete with children in Beijing and Bangalore, we need an army of you to become teachers and principals in schools that this nation cannot afford to give up on. I will pay our educators what they deserve and give them more support, but I will also ask more of them to be mentors to other teachers and serve in high-need schools and high-need subject areas like math and science. We will need you. At a time when there are children in the city of New Orleans who still spend each night in a lonely trailer, we need more of you to take a weekend or a week off from work and head down south and help rebuild. If you can't get the time, volunteer at the local homeless shelter or soup kitchen in your own communities because there's more than enough work to go around. Find an organization that's fighting poverty or a candidate who promotes policies you believe in and find a way to help them. We need you. At a time of war, we need you to work for peace. At a time of inequality, we need you to work for opportunity. At a time of so much cynicism and so much doubt, we need you to make us believe again. That's your task, class of 2008. Now understand this. Believing that change is possible is not the same as being naive. Go into service with your eyes wide open, for change will not come easily. On the big issues that our nation faces, difficult choices await. We'll have to face some hard truths, and some sacrifice will be required, not only from you individually, but from the nation as a whole. There's no magic bullet to our energy problems, for example, no perfect energy source, so all of us will have to use the energy sources we have more wisely. Deep-rooted poverty will not be reversed overnight. It'll require both money and reform at a time when our federal and state budgets are strapped and when Washington is skeptical that reform is possible. Transforming our education system will require not only bold government action, but a change in attitudes among parents and among students. And it's hard to change attitudes. Bringing an end to the slaughter in Darfur will involve navigating extremely difficult realities on the ground, even for those with the best of intentions. And so, understand that should you take the path of service, should you choose to take up one of these causes as your own, know that you'll experience the occasional frustrations and the occasional failures. Even your successes will be marked by imperfections and unintended consequences. I guarantee you there will be times when friends or family urge you to pursue more sensible endeavors with more tangible rewards. And there will be times where you will be tempted to take such advice. But I hope you'll remember during those times of doubt and frustration that there is nothing naive about your impulse to change the world. Because all it takes is one act of service, one blow against injustice, to send forth what Robert Kennedy called that tiny ripple of hope. That's what changes the world, that one act. An act by you, class of 2008. You know, Ted Kennedy often tells a story about the 5th anniversary celebration of the Peace Corps. He was there, and he asked one of the young Americans why he had chosen to volunteer. And the man replied, "Because it was the first time someone asked me to do something for my country." It was the first time someone asked me to do something for my country. Now, I don't know how many of you have been asked that question, but after today, you have no excuses. I am asking you, and if I should have the honor of serving this nation as president, I will be asking again and again in the coming years. Because we may disagree as Americans on certain issues and positions, but I believe that we can be unified in service to a greater good. I intend to make it a cause of my presidency, and I believe that with all my heart, this generation is ready and eager and up to the challenge. We will face our share of cynics and doubters, but we always have. I can still remember a conversation I had with an older man all those years ago, right before I was headed for my new job in Chicago. He said, "Barack, I'll give you a bit of advice. Forget about this community organizing business and do something that's going to make you some money. You can change the world and people won't appreciate you trying. But you've got a nice voice, so you should think about going into television broadcasting. I'm telling you, you have a future there." Now, I've wondered, he might have been right about that TV thing, but he was wrong about everything else. For that old man has not seen what I've seen. He has not seen the faces of ordinary people the first time they clear a vacant lot or build a new playground or force an unresponsive leader to provide services to a community that's been neglected. He's not seen the face of a child brightened because of an inspiring teacher or an inspiring mentor. He's not seen the scores of young people educate their parents on issues like Darfur or mobilize the conscience of a nation around the challenges of climate change. He's not seen the lines of men and women that wrap around schools and churches that stretch out block after block after block just so they could make their voices heard, many for the first time. And that old man who didn't believe the world could change, who didn't think one person could make a difference, well, he certainly didn't know much about the life of Joseph Kennedy's youngest son. It's rare in this country of ours that a person exists who has touched the lives of nearly every single American without many of us even realizing it. And yet, because of Ted Kennedy, millions of children can see a doctor when they get sick. Mothers and fathers can leave work to spend time with their newborns. Working Americans are paid higher wages and compensated for overtime and can keep their health insurance when they change jobs. They're protected from discrimination in the workplace, and those who are born with disabilities can still get an education and health care and fair treatment on the job. Our schools are stronger. Our colleges are filled with more Americans who are afford it. And I have a feeling that Ted Kennedy is not done just yet. Surely, if one man can achieve so much and make such a difference in the lives of so many people, then each of us can do our part. Surely, if his service and his story can forever shape America's story, then our collective service can shape the destiny of this generation. At the very least, his living example calls us to try. And that is all I ask of you on this joyous day of new beginnings. That is what Senator Kennedy asks of you as well. And that is how we will keep so much needed work going and the cause of justice everlasting and the dream alive for generations to come. Thank you so much to the class of 2008, and congratulations on your graduation. Thank you, everybody. God bless you. Thank you.